In August of 2018, what began as a missing persons case in the quiet suburb of Frederick, Colorado, quickly turned into one of the most shocking family murder cases in modern American history. The Watts family, Shanann, a 34-year-old pregnant mother of two, and her daughters Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, disappeared without a trace. The nation watched in horror as the truth behind their vanishing unfolded, leading to a dark and tragic revelation. Shanann Watts seemed to have it all. Her social media pages were filled with pictures of her loving family, her two adorable daughters, Bella and Celeste, and her seemingly doting husband, Chris Watts. They looked like the picture-perfect family, living in a spacious home and preparing to welcome a new baby boy into the world, whom they planned to name Nico. But behind the smiling photos and happy family posts, there was trouble brewing. Beneath the surface, cracks in their relationship were beginning to show. Chris, who had once seemed like a supportive husband, had grown distant. Shanann, who was often away on business trips, had started to notice changes in his behavior, changes that would eventually lead to a horrifying tragedy. August 13, 2018, started like any other day. Shanann had just returned from a work trip late the night before, and her friend Nicole Atkinson had dropped her off at her home. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant, and despite feeling exhausted, she had a busy day ahead. But when Shanann didn't show up for a scheduled doctor's appointment and wasn't responding to calls or texts, Nicole grew concerned. It was unlike Shanann to go silent, especially when she had two young children to care for. Nicole decided to stop by the Watts house, but there was no answer. The home was eerily quiet. Panic began to set in. Nicole called Chris Watts, who was supposedly at work, and urged him to come home. After multiple unanswered calls and no sign of Shanann or the kids, Nicole called the police to report them missing. When Chris arrived home, he seemed nervous but cooperative. He allowed the police to search the house, and what they found only deepened the mystery. Shanann's car, along with the girls' car seats, was still in the garage. Shanann's purse, keys, and phone were inside the house. Everything was in its place, but there was no sign of the family. Chris gave an emotional interview to the media, pleading for the safe return of his wife and daughters. His voice cracked, and his eyes welled with tears as he begged, "Shanann, Bella, Cece, if you're out there, just come home." But behind Chris' seemingly heartbroken appearance, detectives were growing suspicious. Something about his behavior didn't add up. His body language appeared off, too calm, too rehearsed. And then, they uncovered the first major clue that would turn the investigation on its head. As investigators delved deeper into Chris's life, they made a disturbing discovery. Chris had been having an affair. His mistress was Nicole Kessinger, a woman he had met at work. Nicole was an employee at Anadarko Petroleum, the same company where Chris worked, and the two had started seeing each other just a few months before Shanann and the girls went missing. Chris had told Nicole that he and Shanann were in the process of separating, and he painted a picture of a marriage that was already over. He promised Nicole that he would soon be free of his current life and that they could start a new one together. Nicole later revealed to investigators that she believed Chris was already in the final stages of divorce when their relationship began, and she had no idea that Shanann was pregnant. This revelation, combined with Chris' increasingly strange behavior, prompted investigators to take a closer look at him as a potential suspect. On August 15th, Chris was brought in for questioning and administered a polygraph test. The results were damning. Chris failed the test, confirming investigators' suspicions. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Chris cracked. In a shocking confession, he told investigators that he had killed Shanann after an argument and then, in a moment of panic, had taken his daughters to an oil field where he worked, killing them too. His story was gut-wrenching, but it was far from the full truth. In his initial confession, Chris claimed that after telling Shanann he wanted a divorce, she had strangled their daughters in a fit of rage, and in retaliation, he killed her. But investigators didn't believe him, and they were right. The true story was much darker. After further interrogation and emotional pressure from his father, Chris finally revealed the unthinkable. On the morning of August 13th, Chris Watts had strangled his pregnant wife, Shanann, in their bed. After murdering her, he wrapped her body in a sheet and loaded it into his truck. Then, with his two daughters still alive in the back seat, He drove to an oil site owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. What happened next is beyond comprehension. At the oil site, Chris smothered his daughters one by one, first Bella, then Celeste, before disposing of their small bodies in oil tanks. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. It was a cold, calculated act, and Chris had tried to cover it up by pretending his and family had simply disappeared. As the details of the case came to light, the public was horrified. How could a father do something so heinous to his own family? Chris Watts became a figure of national outrage, his name synonymous with betrayal and cold-blooded murder. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, Nico. He avoided the death penalty in exchange for his guilty plea, but he was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, Shanann's family gave emotional impact statements, expressing their grief and pain over the loss of their beloved daughter and grandchildren. Chris showed no visible emotion as he was led out of the courtroom, a man forever condemned for the horror he had inflicted on his own family. As the case was solved by the officials, there is a question that haunts everyone who has heard this case is, why? Why did Chris Watts murder his entire family? Some point to his affair with Nicole Kessinger as the trigger. It's been suggested that Chris, wanting to start a new life with his mistress, saw his family as an obstacle. Others speculate that financial troubles, mounting debt, and the pressures of being a husband and father drove him to snap. Chris himself has offered various reasons, none of which seem to fully explain the brutality of his actions. In a prison interview in 2019, Chris admitted that he wasn't sure what drove him to kill his family. He said, "I don't have an answer for that. It's like I just lost my mind and did something I never thought I could do." Was Chris Watts a monster all along, hiding behind the facade of a family man? Or was he pushed to the edge by circumstances we'll never fully understand? Even though Chris Watts is now behind bars, the chilling details of this case continue to resonate, serving as a sobering reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers can lurk behind the walls of our own homes.